A woman is on her knees at the door of the temple in Shiloh, her lips moving, no sound coming out. You are standing close enough to see the tears cut lines down her face. She has come to this same doorway year after year with the same empty arms, and the old priest watching her, a man named Eli, decides she is drunk. 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 13. Eli thought she had been drunken. He was wrong. She had not touched wine. She was a woman moving her lips with no voice, pouring out a grief so deep it had gone past sound. Her name is Hannah. What she is about to whisper will set a whole nation's throne in motion. I've sat with that a long time, that the whole story of crowns and armies you are about to watch begins with one woman. Nobody in that room understood. Stay with me, because this is the map of the next hour. From Shiloh to Mount Gilboa, from a temple floor to a mountain where a king falls on his own sword. In between is how Israel got the throne it begged for, and what that throne cost when the bill finally came due. 4 lives carry the whole thing. Hannah, who weeps. Samuel, the boy she gives away. Saul, the tall king who loses his soul. David, the shepherd anointed in the dark. This is the book of 1 Samuel, walked from that doorway to that mountain as one full-length movie. Not a lesson, a story, the kind the record kept the whole reel of, scene by scene, name by name. And I want to run it for you the way it actually plays. I taught history for 30 years down in the Delta, and here is what I told my students. The Bible does not open its throne story with a battle. It opens with a barren woman crying at a door. Here's how I read it, and you may read it different. That's all right. Everything that comes after, the crown, the giant, the spear, the sword on the hill, flows out of this one night at Shiloh. So, stay to the end. Stay to the mountain where it ends, because you will not understand how this book closes until you have stood here at the beginning, watching a woman the priest called drunk quietly change the shape of a nation. To understand why Hannah wept, you have to see the house she lived in. Her husband was a man named Elkanah, and Elkanah had 2 wives at Shiloh, Hannah, whom he loved, and Peninnah, who had given him children. Year after year, the family made the climb up to the temple to worship, and year after year the same wound reopened. Peninnah had sons and daughters. Hannah had none, and the text does not soften it. It says Peninnah provoked her sore, needled her, made her miserable, until Hannah could not even eat. Picture that dinner table, one wife counting her children like a scoreboard, the other one staring at an empty bowl, a good man beside her, asking why she cried, not understanding that his kindness could not fill the one place that ached. So, Hannah did the only thing left to a woman with no power in that room. She took it to the door of the house of the Lord, and she made a vow. 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 11. She promised that if God would look on her affliction and give her a son, she would give the boy right back, give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor would ever touch his head. I've sat with that vow for years, and it still stops me. She is not bargaining for a child to hold. She is asking for a son so she can hand him away. That is a grief I don't think you understand until you have wanted something so badly you would receive it just to surrender it. Here's how I read it. Hannah was not praying to fill her own arms. She was praying to be useful to God, even at the cost of the very thing she begged for. Let me stop the story a second and tell you why this woman gets under my skin. I taught school for 30 years, and I sat with a lot of praying mothers in the Mississippi Delta. Women who carried more than anybody at the front of the church ever knew. My own mother taught Sunday school, and I watched her pray, like Hannah prayed, lips moving, no sound. When my father died in 2011, and I cleaned out his library, I found his old KJV with the margins full of ink, and this chapter was underlined twice. I used to skim right past Hannah to get to the kings and the giants. I was wrong. I've come to believe the whole book stands on her. God heard her. Hannah conceived and bore a son, and named him Samuel. And when the boy was weaned, old enough to eat and walk and live away from her, she kept her word. She brought him back to Shiloh, back to old Eli, and she said the hardest sentence a mother ever spoke. As long as he liveth, he shall be lent to the Lord. 1 Samuel 1, verse 28. Lent, not loaned for a season, given for good. She walked home with empty arms a second time, and this time she had chosen it. And here is the part that undoes me. She did not walk home broken. She sang. 1 Samuel chapter 2 opens with Hannah's song, a hymn so fierce, so full, it echoes 1,000 years later in the mouth of another young mother named Mary. My heart rejoiceth in the Lord, she sang. The barren hath borne 7. Every year after that, the record says, she sewed her boy a little coat and carried it up to him at the temple, year by year, watching him grow in a house that was not hers. Now watch what kind of house she left him in, and what kind of world it was. The record tells us something quietly devastating. In those days, the word of the Lord was precious, rare, scarce, hard to come by. There was no open vision. Heaven had gone quiet over Israel, and into that silence, God placed a boy sleeping on the temple floor. One night, the lamp of God had not yet gone out. The record marks the hour by that flickering light, and a voice called the child's name, Samuel. He thought it was Eli. He ran to the old man. 3 times he ran, and 3 times Eli sent him back, until the old priest finally understood who was calling in the dark. So Eli told him what to say. If the voice comes again, answer it. And it came. The Lord called a 4th time, and this time the boy did not run. He lay still in the dark, and he said the words that opened the ears of a nation. Speak, for thy servant heareth. 1 Samuel 3, verse 10. Sit with that a second. A whole country had gone deaf to heaven, and the first one to hear again was a child nobody would have picked. A boy on loan, sleeping under a dying lamp. I remember the first time that landed on me. I was a young teacher, tired, reading it late, and it hit me that God did not shout over Israel. He whispered to the one heart still soft enough to answer. That is how the book turns. Not with thunder, with a boy in the dark saying, I'm listening. While the boy Samuel was growing up clean in that temple, the men who ran it were rotting from the inside. Eli had 2 sons, Hophni and Phinehas, and the record does not call them priests. It calls them sons of Belial, who knew not the Lord. 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 12. Worthless men, men who wore the robes and carried the knives and did not know the God they served. Most of us picture the danger to Israel coming from outside, the armies, the enemies, the Philistines out on the plain. But here is where I've landed after reading this book many times. The first threat to Israel was not the army on the border. It was the corruption at the altar. Watch how they did it, because it is uglier than a sermon usually tells you. When a worshipper brought his sacrifice, the law gave the priest a portion. That was fair. But Eli's sons were not content with a portion. They sent servants with 3-pronged forks to stab into the pot and take whatever came up. And if the man protested, They took the fat of the sacrifice by force, the part that belonged to God, while it was still raw, before it was even offered. I believe that detail matters more than we let it. They were not just greedy, they were stealing from God in front of the people, in the open, and daring anyone to stop them. And the worshippers, the text says, came to abhor the offering of the Lord. The corruption at the top poisoned the faith of everybody underneath. So God sent a warning. A man of God came to old Eli with words that must have frozen the blood. The prophecy against Eli's house in 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 31. Behold, the days come that I will cut off thine arm. Your house will not grow old. Your 2 sons will die on the same day, both of them, as a sign. I've read that passage slow, and here is the part that grieves me. Eli knew. He heard about what his sons were doing, and the record says he rebuked them with words, but he did not stop them. He loved them more than he loved the honor of God. And a man who will not restrain the evil in his own house has already begun to lose it. That is not me being harsh. That is the text, laid out plain, and it is a warning I've had to sit with in my own family. Now the outside threat comes, and it comes hard. 1 Samuel chapter 4. The Philistines gathered against Israel on the plain, and the 2 armies met, and Israel lost badly. 4,000 men fell in the first clash. So the elders made a decision that sounds holy and was actually desperate. They said, "Bring the ark. Bring the ark of the covenant of the Lord out of Shiloh. Carry it into the camp, and it will save us." And who carried it down? Hophni and Phinehas, the very 2 God had already marked for death. I want you to feel the difference here, because I think we still get it wrong today. They treated the ark like a good luck charm, like a box of power they could aim at their problem without ever dealing with their sin. And it did not work. God is not a machine you operate. He is a person you obey. The Philistines heard Israel shouting when the ark came into the camp, and at first they were afraid. "God has come into their camp," they said. "Woe unto us." But fear turned to fury, and they fought like men with nothing to lose. And the slaughter that day was worse than anything Israel had ever seen. The record gives us the number, so we cannot look away. There fell of Israel 30,000 footmen, 30,000, and in the middle of that field, both of Eli's sons died, Hophni and Phinehas, on the same day, exactly as the man of God had said. And then the sentence the book had been building toward, the one I still cannot read quickly. The ark of God was taken, captured, carried off the field by the Philistines like a trophy. A runner came back to Shiloh with his clothes torn and dirt on his head. Old Eli was sitting by the road, 98 years old, blind, and the text says his heart trembled for the ark of God. Not for his sons first, for the ark. The runner told him everything. The army broken, both sons dead, and Eli held on. But when the man said, "The ark of God is taken," the old priest fell backward off his seat by the gate, and he brake his neck, and he died. 1 Samuel 4. 98 years, and it was the loss of God's presence, not the loss of his children, that finally killed him. And there was one more death that day, and it gives us the name that names the whole chapter. Phinehas had a wife, and she was pregnant near her time. When word reached her that her husband was dead, her father-in-law was dead, and the ark was taken, the labor came on her all at once, and she bore a son, and then she died. But before she went, she named the boy. 1 Samuel 4, verse 21. She called him Ichabod, saying, The glory is departed from Israel, for the ark of God is taken. Ichabod. The glory is gone. I have sat with that name on many long nights. A mother, dying, naming her son not after hope, but after loss, so that Israel would carry the memory of this day in a living child's name. But do not close the book on that word, because God was not finished. And here is where I read a strange mercy. The Philistines carried the ark into the temple of their god Dagon, set it up like a prize beside their idol, and went to bed. In the morning, 1 Samuel chapter 5, they found Dagon fallen on his face before the ark of the Lord. They stood him back up. The next morning, Dagon was on the ground again, head and hands broken off on the threshold. I believe that is the Lord quietly making a point in the enemy's own house. Israel thought the glory had departed, but the God, whose glory it was, had not gone anywhere. He was in Philistine territory, alone, with no army to defend him, breaking their God to pieces in the dark. Ichabod, the mother said, the glory is departed. And God answered from inside the enemy's temple. Not quite. Years pass, the ark comes home. Samuel grows into the last great judge Israel ever had. A man who prays and the nation listens. A man who walks a circuit year after year, settling disputes and calling people back to God. And for a while, it holds. But Samuel gets old. His own sons, like Eli's before him, turn out crooked. They take bribes and twist judgment. And the elders of Israel see an old prophet and two bad heirs, and they come to him at Ramah with a demand that changes everything. Make us a king. 1 Samuel chapter 8, verse 5. Make us a king to judge us like all the nations. Read that last phrase slow, because it is the whole problem in 5 words. Like all the nations. Israel was never meant to be like all the nations. That was the point of them. They had a king already, invisible, holy, the God who split the sea and fed them in the desert. But you cannot see an invisible king ride out in front of your army. You cannot point to him when the neighboring country points to theirs. And I understand the hunger under this. I really do. They wanted something they could see. Here's how I read it. This was not mainly a political request. It was a crisis of faith dressed up as a policy. The record says the thing displeased Samuel, and he prayed. That is the mark of the man. His first move was not to argue with the people. It was to take it to God. And God's answer is one of the saddest lines in the whole Bible. 1 Samuel 8, verse 7. They have not rejected thee, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. I've sat with that a long time. The old prophet thought this was about him being pushed aside, replaced, made obsolete. And God tells him gently, no, this wound is mine, not yours. They are not tired of you, Samuel. They are tired of me. They want a man on a throne because they will not trust a God on a cloud. So God tells Samuel to give them what they asked for, but first to warn them exactly what it will cost. And what follows is one of the most honest speeches in Scripture, because God does not sell them a fantasy. He tells them the manner of the king who will reign over them. 1 Samuel chapter 8, verses 11 through 17. He will take your sons and make them run before his chariots and fight his wars. He will take your daughters to be cooks and bakers and perfumers. He will take your fields, the best of them, and give them to his friends. He will take 1/10 of your grain and your flocks. 10 times the record hammers one verb. He will take, he will take, he will take. The invisible king had spent 40 years giving. The visible king, God warns them, will spend his reign taking. And then the line that should have stopped them cold. Ye shall cry out in that day because of your king, which ye shall have chosen, and the Lord will not hear you in that day. There will come a morning, God says, when the crown you begged for becomes the chain you wear, and you will cry to me to undo it, and I will let you live with what you chose. I don't say that to be grim. I say it because I've watched it come true in ordinary lives. People who demand the very thing that ends up ruling them. But the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel. They heard the whole warning. Sons taken, daughters taken, fields taken, tears coming. And they did not flinch. Nevertheless, the people said nay. 1 Samuel chapter 8. Nay, but we will have a king over us. Feel the weight of that word. Nay. God laid the entire bill on the table, itemized, and Israel looked at it and said no thank you to the warning, and yes anyway to the crown. That we may be like all the nations, they said, and that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. Go out before us. That was the ache underneath it all. They wanted a body in front of the army, a face on the throne, a man they could follow into the fight, and they were willing to trade the God who fought for them to get it. I want to leave you with one thing before we meet this king they wanted. Israel did not stumble into monarchy by accident. They asked for it. They were warned in detail, and they insisted. And God, in a mercy that still unsettles me, said yes. He gave them the very thing that would cost them their sons and their fields, and in the end would bleed to a man falling on his own sword on a mountain. Sometimes the hardest judgment God gives a people is simply this. He lets them have exactly what they demanded. The throne they begged for is coming. Watch closely how it arrives, because it does not arrive the way they pictured. It arrives hiding in the baggage, looking for a herd of lost donkeys. The first king of Israel enters the story looking for donkeys. Not a throne, not a crown. Donkeys. 1 Samuel chapter 9. A man named Kish had lost some of his animals, and he sent his son Saul out with a servant to find them. They searched hill country for days, back and forth, and found nothing. And I love that the record starts him here, because it tells you God does not always call a man off a stage. Sometimes he calls him off a dirt road, tired and frustrated, ready to give up and go home. Saul was about to quit the search when the servant remembered there was a seer in the next town, a man of God who might know where the donkeys were. That seer was Samuel. Now here is the one thing the record wants you to notice about Saul before anything else. 1 Samuel 9, verse 2. He was a choice young man, and there was not among the children of Israel a goodlier person than he. From his shoulders and upward, he was higher than any of the people, head and shoulders above the whole nation. Israel had asked for a king like all the nations, and God gave them a man who looked exactly like what they had in mind. Tall, handsome, impressive, the kind of man you would cast for the part without a second thought. And I believe God did that on purpose. He gave them the king their eyes wanted, so that later, when it fell apart, they would understand the lesson bone deep. What you can see is not what saves you. God had already told Samuel this man was coming. And when Saul walked up asking for directions to the seer, Samuel fed him, honored him, kept him overnight, and in the morning took a vial of oil and poured it over his head. 1 Samuel chapter 10, verse 1. He kissed him and said, "Is it not because the Lord hath anointed thee to be captain over his inheritance?" Picture it. A farm boy who left home to chase livestock standing in a doorway at dawn, with olive oil running down his face, being told he is the king of Israel. He did not campaign for it. He did not want it. He was, at that moment, the most reluctant king you could imagine. Let me tell you where I've landed on Saul, because I think we judge him too fast. When I taught history for 30 years, I watched the same pattern over and over. The person nobody notices at the start handed something bigger than they ever asked for. My read of Saul is that he began genuinely humble. The problem was never that he wanted the crown too much. It was that he could not hold it once it started to weigh on him. I used to read him as a villain from chapter 1. I don't anymore. I read him now as a warning about what power does to a man who never learned to obey. Because watch the coronation. Samuel gathered all Israel to present their new king. And when the moment came to bring him forward, he was gone. They had to ask God where he was. And the answer is almost comic if it were not so telling. 1 Samuel 10, verse 22. Behold, he hath hid himself among the stuff, among the baggage, the tallest man in Israel, and on the day of his crowning he is crouched down behind the luggage, hiding. They ran and pulled him out. And when he stood up, head and shoulders above everyone as always, the people shouted, God save the king. And for one shining moment, it worked. When an enemy king threatened to gouge out the right eye of every man in Jabesh Gilead, the Spirit came on Saul, and he raised an army overnight and rescued the whole city. 1 Samuel chapter 11. That was Saul at his best, Spirit-filled, brave, giving God the credit. If the story had ended there, he would be remembered as a hero. If this is landing on you the way it lands on me, do me a favor and hold the name of one figure in your mind, Saul, and comment it below when we reach the mountain, so I can see who walked the whole road with me. Because the road turns here. It turns at a place called Gilgal. 1 Samuel chapter 13. The Philistines had gathered against Israel with more chariots than Saul had soldiers, and Saul's men were deserting, hiding in caves, shaking. Samuel had told him to wait 7 days, wait for the prophet to come and offer the sacrifice before the battle. And Saul waited. He waited almost the whole 7 days, but the army kept melting away. And on the 7th day, with Samuel not yet arrived, Saul could not stand the pressure 1 hour longer. So he forced himself, the record says, and he offered the burnt offering with his own hands, a thing only the priest was allowed to do. And just as he finished, Samuel walked up. Most people read this and think, what is the big deal? He was only trying to pray before a battle. But look closer, because this is the whole tragedy in one scene. Samuel's word was blunt. Thou hast done foolishly. You have not kept the commandment of the Lord. And then the sentence that hangs over everything else in this book, 1 Samuel 13, verse 14. Thy kingdom shall not continue. The Lord hath sought him a man after his own heart. Feel the size of that. One act of impatience, and the crown is already promised to somebody else. A man after God's own heart, who at this moment is a boy in a field with sheep, whose name has not even been spoken yet. Saul did not lose the throne by losing a battle. He lost it by not being able to wait. And here's how I read it, hard as it is. God was not looking for a taller man. He was looking for an obedient one. The crack at Gilgal becomes a canyon in the very next act. God gives Saul one more clear command, a hard one, but unmistakable. 1 Samuel chapter 15. Go and strike Amalek, the old enemy that ambushed Israel in the wilderness, and utterly destroy all that they have, everything. Leave nothing. Now I will be honest with you. This is one of the passages I have wrestled with the longest, and I am not going to pretend it is easy. But set that wrestling aside for a moment, because the point the book is making is not about the severity of the command. It is about Saul's response to a command he clearly understood. Because Saul went, and Saul won the battle, and then Saul did the one thing he was told not to do. He spared Agag, the king of the Amalekites, kept him alive as a trophy, and he spared the best of the sheep and the oxen and everything that was good. The record is careful to say they destroyed only what was worthless and cheap, and kept alive everything valuable. That is not obedience, with a small exception. That is a man obeying the parts that cost him nothing and keeping the parts he wanted. And when Samuel came the next morning, Saul greeted him with a smile and said, "I have performed the commandment of the Lord." He believed his own story. That is the frightening part to me. He had disobeyed with his hands full of the evidence, bleating sheep behind him, and he stood there convinced he had obeyed. Samuel stopped him with a question. "What then is this bleating of the sheep in mine ears?" And Saul did what frightened men always do. He blamed the people, and he dressed his disobedience in religion. "We kept the best animals to sacrifice them to your God." And Samuel answered with the line that outlived the whole kingdom. 1 Samuel 15, verse 22. "Hath the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to hearken than the fat of rams." I've sat with that verse for years, and here is where I've landed. God is not impressed by the offering you bring him from the thing he told you to leave alone. Obedience first, everything else is negotiation. Then Samuel said the words that ended Saul's dynasty forever. 1 Samuel 15, verse 23. "Rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. Because thou hast rejected the word of the Lord, he hath also rejected thee from being king." Hear how heavy that is. God calls plain stubbornness, the refusal to fully obey, as serious as witchcraft, as serious as bowing to an idol. Not because it looks as dramatic, but because it puts the same thing on the throne of the heart, yourself instead of God. And then comes one of the most cinematic images in the whole book. Saul, desperate now, grabbed at Samuel as the old prophet turned to leave, grabbed the edge of his robe to hold him back, and the skirt of Samuel's mantle tore off in Saul's hand. The fabric ripped, and Samuel, holding the moment like a prophet does, said, "The Lord hath rent the kingdom of Israel from thee this day, and hath given it to a neighbor of thine that is better than thou." The torn cloth in Saul's fist was the whole kingdom, coming apart in his hands, and he could not stitch it back. The record closes the scene with a line that aches. Samuel came no more to see Saul until the day of his death. The prophet walked away, and the two men never met again in peace. Saul was still wearing the crown, but heaven had already moved on to a field outside Bethlehem. So heaven moved to Bethlehem, and it moved in secret. 1 Samuel chapter 16. God tells a grieving Samuel to stop mourning for Saul, fill his horn with oil, and go anoint a new king among the sons of a man named Jesse. And Samuel, the fearless prophet who faced down kings, is afraid. If Saul hears of it, he will kill me. Think about that. The most powerful spiritual man in Israel is now moving like a hunted man, because the king he anointed has become a danger to everyone around him. So God gives him cover. Take a heifer. Say you have come to Bethlehem to offer a sacrifice, and invite Jesse to it. The anointing of the greatest king in Israel's history had to be smuggled in under the disguise of an ordinary worship service. I find that quietly stunning, that God's biggest moves so often arrive looking like nothing at all. Jesse brought his sons out one by one, and this is where the record hands us the sentence the whole book has been driving toward. The oldest son came first, Eliab, tall and strong, and Samuel took one look and thought, surely this is the Lord's anointed. He was doing exactly what Israel had done, reading the outside, measuring the shoulders, casting for height again. And God stopped him cold. 1 Samuel 16, verse 7. Look not on his countenance, or on the height of his stature, for the Lord seeth not as man seeth. For man looketh on the outward appearance, but the Lord looketh on the heart. Read that 3 times. I'll wait, because that one verse is the correction for the whole mistake Israel made when they asked for a king they could see. 7 sons of Jesse passed before Samuel, one after another, and to every one of them God said, no. 7 strong young men refused, and the old prophet standing there confused, oil in hand, sure he had come to the right house, but running out of sons. So Samuel asked the question that changed history. Are here all thy children? And Jesse said, well, there remains the youngest, but he is out keeping the sheep. Nobody had even bothered to call him in. The future king of Israel was not standing in the lineup. He was in a field doing the lowest job in the family, and his own father did not think to include him. Send and fetch him, Samuel said. We will not sit down till he comes. And they waited. Feel that. A room full of impressive men, standing still, waiting on a shepherd boy nobody counted. And in he came. 1 Samuel 16, verse 12. He was ruddy, and withal of a beautiful countenance, and goodly to look to. A boy with sun on his face and dirt on his hands, smelling of the flock. And the Lord said, arise, anoint him, for this is he. Samuel poured the oil, and the record says the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward. From that day, the oil marked him, but the Spirit sealed him, quietly, in front of his brothers, in a small town, with no crowd and no crown. He went back to his sheep the same afternoon. Nobody outside that room knew Israel had a new king. And here is the hinge the book turns on, the saddest sentence yet. 1 Samuel 16, verse 14. But the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord troubled him. On the same page, the Spirit rushes onto a shepherd boy and lifts off a broken king. 2 men, one anointing, moving in opposite directions. And in one of the strangest turns in Scripture, when Saul's servants looked for a musician to soothe the darkness that now tormented their king, they found a boy who could play the harp. They brought David into Saul's court. The next king came to serve the dying one, and neither of them yet knew what was coming. God had already chosen. The world just had not caught up. Now we come to the scene the whole world knows, and I want to slow it down because familiarity has flattened it. The armies of Israel and the Philistines faced each other across a valley. The valley of Elah, 2 ridges with a ravine between them. And out of the Philistine line stepped a man so large, the record has to give you his measurements, or you would not believe it. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 4. His height was 6 cubits and a span. Depending on how you figure the cubit, that is somewhere around 9 feet tall, or at the least well over 7, a man who would have to stoop to walk through the door of your house, and the record dresses him piece by piece, slow, like a camera moving down his body, so you feel the weight of him. A helmet of brass, on his head, a coat of mail, scale armor, weighing 5,000 shekels of brass, better than 120 pounds of metal, greaves of brass on his legs, a target of brass between his shoulders, and the spear. His spear staff was like a weaver's beam, the record says, thick as the roller on a loom, and the iron head alone weighed 600 shekels. This was not a soldier. This was a walking siege engine, and twice a day, morning and evening, he came out and roared the same challenge across the valley. "Send me a man. Let us fight. Winner takes all." And he did it, the text says, for 40 days. 40 days he defied the armies of Israel. And every morning the whole army of God, king included, turned and ran from the sound of his voice. Let me stop and tell you the truth about how I used to read this, because it took me a long time to get honest about it. For years, I preached Goliath as a lesson about facing your fears, the giants in your life, the obstacles, all of that. And there is something to it. But when I taught this to my students in the Delta, I'd stop right here at the 40 days, and I'd ask them the question that finally changed it for me. Where was Saul? Because remember who Saul was. 1 Samuel already told us, head and shoulders above every man in Israel, the tallest man in the nation, the one man built to answer a giant. And for 40 days, he sat in his tent. I was wrong about this story for a long time. It is not first about a boy who was brave. It is about a king who had lost the spirit and could not move, and a nation that took its cue from a leader running on empty. The giant did not conquer Israel. Israel's fear did. Sit with that, because I had to. And into that frozen valley walks a boy with a sack lunch. 1 Samuel 17. David's 3 oldest brothers were in Saul's army. His father Jesse, back in Bethlehem, sent the youngest with provisions for them, bread and cheese, the record says, to carry to his brothers and bring back word of how they fared. He was not sent to fight. He was sent on an errand, a delivery boy crossing the camp with food in his arms. And he arrived right as Goliath came out for the morning taunt, and David watched the entire army of the living God flinch and scatter. And something in him would not sit still. He started asking around, "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine," he said, "that he should defy the armies of the living God?" Hear the difference in the question. Everyone else saw a giant too big to beat. David saw a pagan too small to be mocking God. Same man in the valley, completely different math. Word got up to Saul that a boy was talking about fighting, and Saul sent for him and did what a natural king does. He put his own armor on the boy, his helmet, his coat of mail, his sword, and David buckled it all on and tried to walk, and could not. 1 Samuel 17. He said, "I cannot go with these, for I have not proved them." And he took them off. I love that detail more than almost any in the book. The king tried to make the shepherd fight like a king, and it did not fit. David could not win wearing Saul's strength. He had to go down into that valley as exactly what he was, a shepherd with a shepherd's tools and a God he already knew from the field. So he took off the armor and went down toward the ravine as himself. And on the way, he stopped at the brook running through the bottom of the valley. 1 Samuel 17, verse 40. He chose him 5 smooth stones out of the brook and put them in his shepherd's bag. And his sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. 5 stones. I've heard people spin all kinds of meaning out of that number, but here is how I read it plainly. A man who knows how to use a sling does not need 100 stones. He needs a few good ones and a steady hand. This was not recklessness. This was a boy who had killed a lion and a bear defending his flock, walking to work with the only weapon he had ever trusted. Goliath saw him coming and was insulted. A boy, ruddy and handsome, with a stick and a bag. The giant cursed him by his gods and promised to feed his flesh to the birds. And here, David gives the speech that is the real climax of the whole book. Bigger than the stone, bigger than the sword. 1 Samuel 17, verse 45. Thou comest to me with a sword, and with a spear, and with a shield. But I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defied. Hear what he just did. He named the fight. Goliath thought it was iron against a stick. David told him it was the name of God against a man who mocked him. This day, David said, will the Lord deliver thee into mine hand, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. And then it happened fast. The record does not linger, because it does not need to. David ran. He ran toward the giant, which no one had done in 40 days. He reached into the bag, took a stone, slung it, and the stone sank into Goliath's forehead, and the giant fell on his face to the earth. One stone, one throw, 120 pounds of armor, and 40 days of terror, undone by a shepherd who would not carry a sword. I have stood in dry valleys in that part of the world, and I have tried to imagine the silence right after, an entire army on each ridge, holding its breath, watching the mountain of a man go down like a felled tree. And David was not finished making the point. He had no sword of his own, so he ran to the body, drew Goliath's own sword out of its sheath, and cut off the giant's head with it. The weapon the giant trusted became the instrument of his end. When the Philistines saw their champion was dead, the whole line broke. 1 Samuel 17. They fled, and Israel, the same army that had cowered for 40 days, suddenly found its courage and chased them down the valley. That is the thing about fear in a nation. It only takes one person who refuses to bow to break the spell over everybody else. But watch the last frame of this scene, because it plants the seed of everything dark that follows. As the men came home from the slaughter, the women came out of the cities singing and dancing, and here is the song they sang. 1 Samuel 18, verse 7. Saul hath slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. Sit with that a second, and hear it the way a jealous king would hear it. The boy who just saved the nation gets 10,000s. The king gets thousands. It was a song of joy. But to Saul, standing there listening, it was the sound of a throne slipping. The record says, from that day forward, Saul eyed David. The giant was dead, and a new and slower danger had just been born. Not out in the valley, but inside the heart of the man wearing the crown. Jealousy is a slow poison, and the record lets us watch it work. 1 Samuel 18, verse 9. Saul eyed David from that day and forward. That is such a quiet, chilling little sentence. He watched him. Every victory David won, every time the women sang, every time the boy succeeded, Saul's suspicion thickened. And I have to admit something here, because this book has a way of holding up a mirror. I have felt the small version of what destroyed Saul. The tightening in the chest when somebody younger does the thing you could not and gets the praise you wanted. I do not say that to excuse him. I say it because if we pretend Saul was a monster, and we are not, we miss the warning. The seed that grew into murder started as a feeling most of us have quietly entertained, but Saul fed it, and it grew teeth. David would play the harp to soothe the darkness in the king, the same as before. And one afternoon, with the music playing, Saul took the spear that was in his hand and threw it, meaning to pin David to the wall. 1 Samuel 18. Twice he cast the javelin to smite David, and twice David slipped away. Read that scene slow. A boy is playing music to comfort a tormented king, and the king answers the kindness with a spear. That is what unchecked envy does. It tries to kill the very thing sent to help it. David finally understood he could not stay, and he ran, became a fugitive, hunted across the wilderness by the armies of his own country. And the one bright thread through all of it was Saul's own son. Jonathan, the crown prince, the man with the most to lose if David became king, loved David as his own soul. 1 Samuel chapter 20 holds their covenant. Jonathan warning David, weeping with him in a field, swearing friendship between their houses forever, choosing the shepherd over his own claim to the throne. I've sat with Jonathan a long time, and here's where I land. He is the proof that Saul's bitterness was a choice, not a fate. Same house, same pressure, same threat to his future, and Jonathan chose love where his father chose the spear. Two men facing the identical loss, and they went opposite directions with it. Now the wilderness years turn strange, because they hand David the very thing he had every reason to want, and he refuses it. Twice. First comes the cave. 1 Samuel chapter 24. Saul, hunting David through the crags of En-gedi with 3,000 men, steps alone into a cave to relieve himself. The very cave where David and his men are hiding in the dark at the back. David's men whisper, "This is it. This is the day God gave your enemy into your hand." And David creeps up in the shadows, close enough to kill, and instead he only cuts off the skirt of Saul's robe with his knife. And then the record says, even that grieved him. His heart smote him for cutting the king's garment. He came out of the cave holding the piece of cloth and called after Saul, and he said the sentence that defines him. "I will not stretch forth mine hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed." Sit with the size of that. David had the promise of the throne, the sworn word of Samuel, an enemy asleep at his feet, and a cave full of men, telling him God had arranged it, and he would not touch him. Because to David, the crown was not worth becoming the kind of man who seized it by murder. And he did not learn it once. It happens again. 1 Samuel chapter 26, when David slips into Saul's camp at night while the whole army sleeps and stands over the king with a spear stuck in the ground beside his head. His man Abishai begs to strike, and again David refuses, and this time he only takes the spear and the cruse of water from beside Saul's pillow and carries them off to prove he was there and spared him anyway. Twice the throne was one motion away. Twice David chose to wait on God rather than grab with his own hand. That is the difference between the two men, laid bare. Saul could not wait for a sacrifice. David could not bring himself to take a shortcut, even to a promise God had already made him. Now the story turns to its darkest night, and I want to walk it carefully, because it is easy to sensationalize, and I have no interest in that. Samuel the prophet had died. The one voice that could have told Saul what to do was in the ground, and the Philistines had gathered again, a huge army, for the fight that would end everything. Saul looked at that host, and the record says his heart trembled greatly. So he did what a desperate man does when he has burned every bridge to God. He asked God what to do, and heaven was silent. 1 Samuel 28 tells it plain. When Saul inquired of the Lord answered him not, neither by dreams, nor by Urim, nor by prophets. Think about how far he had fallen. The king who once had the Spirit rush upon him now stands in the dark, asking, and hears nothing back. And so Saul, who had earlier driven the mediums and spiritists out of the land as the law commanded, went looking for one in the night. He disguised himself and went to a woman at Endor who had a familiar spirit, and he asked her to bring up Samuel. I am not going to teach you the mechanics of that room, because that is not what the record is for, and it is not what I am for. But hear what the text says happened. Something appeared, and it spoke with Samuel's voice, and it had no comfort for Saul at all. It told him the kingdom was torn from his hand, that the Lord had become his enemy, and then the line that must have hollowed him out completely. Tomorrow shalt thou and thy sons be with me. I've sat with that sentence on long nights. Saul went into that dark house looking for one more chance, and what he carried out was the date of his own death. The next day, and his sons with him. Here is what breaks my heart about this scene, and I think it is the point of the whole descent. The evil that finally undid Saul was not the giant, and it was not David, and it was not even the Philistine army waiting on the plain. It was the slow silence that grew between him and God, one act of disobedience at a time, until a king, who used to be soothed by the harp of David, could not find a single word from heaven when he needed it most. Remember that harp? Early on, when the darkness first came, the music of that shepherd boy would ease Saul, and the evil spirit would depart from him. But he had thrown a spear at the boy who played it. He had driven away the very sound that once brought him peace. And now, on the eve of Mount Gilboa, there was no harp and no music and no word. Only a man in the dark, hearing his own end, read back to him. That is the tragedy this book has been building toward from the moment a tall man hid among the baggage. Not a monster, a soul emptied out. A king who had everything Israel wanted, the height, the crown, the army, and lost the one thing that mattered, the presence of God, and never fought to get it back. And here is where I've landed after reading his whole life many times, and it is different from where most people leave him. We tend to remember Saul as a wicked king, but the real horror of Saul is not his wickedness, it is his emptiness. He kept the throne to the very end. He never lost the title. He died a king, but somewhere along the road, the crown had become a weight he carried, not a calling he served, a burden and not a crown. He ruled a kingdom and could not rule himself. He commanded an army and could not command the fear in his own chest. Watch him walk up that mountain in the morning. He is still the king of Israel, and he has never been more alone. Morning came to Mount Gilboa, and the book closes the way it has been quietly promising since the first page. 1 Samuel chapter 31. The Philistines fought against Israel, and the men of Israel fled and fell down slain on the mountain. And the enemy pressed hard after Saul and his sons, and they slew Jonathan first. Jonathan, the one truly good man in that royal house, the friend who chose love over a crown, cut down on the slope with his brothers. Picture Saul watching it, the son who should have been his heir, the covenant keeper, dead in front of him, and the battle collapsing on every side. And then the archers found the king. The record says the battle went sore against Saul, and the archers hit him, and he was sore wounded of the archers, bleeding, surrounded, the fight lost, his sons dead. Saul turned to his armor-bearer and asked the young man to run him through. So the Philistines could not take him alive and make sport of him, but the armor-bearer was too afraid to raise his hand against the king. So Saul did the last thing left to him. 1 Samuel 31, verse 4. Saul took a sword and fell upon it. The tallest man in Israel, the king the people had begged for, the head and shoulders answer to their demand, face down on his own blade, on a mountain in the dark of a lost battle. And his armor-bearer, seeing him dead, fell on his sword and died beside him. That is where the reel runs out. Not on a throne, on Gilboa. Now stand back and see the whole film at once, from the first frame to the last. Because I have walked this book many times, and it never stops astonishing me how it is built. It opened on a woman weeping at Shiloh, a barren wife the priest thought was drunk, moving her lips with no sound. It ends on a mountain of the dead, a king on his own sword. Between those two nights is the entire answer to the question Israel asked. They wanted a throne like all the nations. This is what the throne cost. I've sat with that a long time. The book runs from Hannah's tears to Saul's blood, and it is telling you the whole way that the crown you can see, ruling in place of the God you cannot, ends on a hill like this one. The throne they begged for is paid for on Gilboa, and the record does not even let you catch your breath at the end, because a young man named David is about to hear the news. And the next thing out of his mouth will be one of the most beautiful laments ever written. How are the mighty fallen? He does not gloat. The man Saul hunted for years weeps for him, and weeps for Jonathan, and tears his clothes over the death of the king who threw spears at him. That is the note the story leaves ringing. Grief, not triumph. The mighty have fallen, and even the one who inherits the throne can only mourn. If you are still with me all the way to the mountain, let me speak to you plainly, one person to another. I taught history for 30 years, and I have read a lot of the rise and fall of kings. But this book is not really about kings. It is about two kinds of hearts, one that could not wait, and one that would not grab. One that kept the crown and lost his soul, and one that walked away from the crown twice and kept his. I don't tell you that to tie a moral on it. I tell you because I've needed it myself more than once. Between you and me, the whole book comes down to whether you can trust God enough to wait on Him, in the dark, with the sword right there in reach. Now hear me, because I want to be careful how I close. What you saw today is one telling, one way of walking the book of 1 Samuel, the way I've come to read it after many years, with it open on my desk. The text is deeper than any retelling can carry. There are corners of this book scholars have argued over for centuries, and there is more in it than one video could ever hold. So take what I've laid out and go back to the record yourself. Read it slow. It will feed you longer than I can. Let me pray us out. Father, you are the God who rules this whole story, the God who heard a weeping woman at a door, who spoke to a boy in the dark, who lifted the humble and let the proud fall on their own blade. Thank you that you see the heart when the world only measures the shoulders. Give us the patience of David and spare us the emptiness of Saul. Teach us to wait on you with the sword in reach and our hands still, and keep us soft enough to say, like a child in the dark, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." Amen. One last thing before you go. If this walked with you the whole way, leave me one word in the comments. Comment, Shiloh, if it was the beginning that held you, the weeping woman who started it all. Comment, Gilboa, if it was the mountain, the weight of what a crown can cost. Tell me where you're watching from and where you got off the road with me. I read them, and I'll see you at the next one. One last word before you go. Everything you heard tonight, I read from Scripture. I am not summoning anything, and I am not here to make you afraid of the dark. I am here to make you stand in awe of the God who rules it. I quote the King James Version, unless I say otherwise. The shadow is real, but it is not the last word. He is.